Hi everyone, welcome back to another philosophy lecture. Um, Today we're gonna do just like a brief review of Locke and then we will dive into Swinburne. Um, well, actually, I wanted to start just by I'm not sure if I explained. Well, I guess I kind of did, but we'll just review. Anyways, the importance of personal identity for philosophy in general. Um, so, the reason this is such an important topic is because personal identity refers to what makes a person a person. So, if you think about that for yourself, I'm sure you've thought about it in some capacity. Probably not um, like, oh, I wonder what it means to be a person, but I'm sure that in some way you have an opinion on it. Maybe like I think if someone would have asked me like 5 years ago or so, what do you think it means to be a person? I would probably say something like, it means that you have your soul, or something like that. So souls would be the things that make people different. I think looking back on it, that would be the the thing that I would say. Um, Maybe you might think that your brain is what makes you a person. I'm just trying to think like what the average, not average, you're above average, you're important. Um, what the typical person might say, and I think there is some idea that you might have of what it means to be a person. So, philosophy is looking at that same question, but taking it probably a little too far, as they normally do. Um, so, like, truly, what what makes you a person? What does it mean to be a person? What are the criteria for being a person? And what constitutes you being the same person from the beginning of your life to the end? So, um, last time we talked about Locke's theory, and in short, his theory is just that the identity of a person across time depends on extending consciousness backwards in time. Um, so, what that means is that I'm the same person that I was as a child because I have the same consciousness that I had then. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Your consciousness remaining the same over time means that you are the same person. So, um, he's actually arguing against the soul theory in this, and we talked about that a little bit with his example of like your soul that you have now could have been the soul of somebody else, and that who's to say that your soul isn't being replaced every night? So his argument is kind of that there's no concrete way to know that you have the same soul that you had when you were a child. So this is a significant thing that he's arguing against the soul theory, mostly because that was probably the primary view up until Locke. Because before Locke, you had people like Descartes, who very clearly he didn't write much about memory, but he would have been a soul theorist because of his emphasis on the soul and dualism. And before Descartes, you had the medieval period, and because it was such a religious era in philosophy, they also focused heavily on the soul. So, yeah, so the fact that he's arguing against it is significant in philosophical history because people hadn't really done that prior to Locke, except Hume. Of course, Hume spoke against most things that people liked at that time. So Hume kind of paved the way, I guess, but Locke was one of the first to really argue against the soul. And to be clear, he's not saying that there isn't a soul. He's just saying that he's also not saying that there is a soul. He's just saying that the soul isn't your reason for maintaining your personhood over time. Also, another significant thing that I don't think I pointed out was the way that Locke defines a person. So, a person, according to Locke, would be a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection. Oh, you can't see. I'll pull it up at the end. And can consider itself as itself. As itself, the same thing in different times and places. Okay, so according to Locke, a person is a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself, the same thing in different times and places. So maybe if you think about yourself, you think about your friends, the people around you, your family members, stuff like that, this might sound like, okay, like, yeah, most people that I know are thinking, conscious thinking beings that have reason and reflection and are capable of recognizing themselves as the same self that was there at their birth, or that was born. You know what I'm saying? For example, I know in some capacity, maybe not fully know, but I think I know that I am the same person that I was as a child. I am thinking right now, so I check that box. Intelligent is subjective, but in the way that he means it, it just means that you're thinking. And I have some capacity for reason and reflection, and I recognize that I've been the same person my whole life. So in that way, I check out as a person, you check out as a person, the people around you probably check out as people. But there is a problem with this theory. And it's that, have you ever thought about a child, a young kid, or a baby? Do they count as a person under this definition? It doesn't really seem like it. They have the capacity for thought, and they have the capacity, well, they have the eventual capacity for reason and reflection, but there's no way that they can consider, that a baby can consider that it's the same baby that it was the day before. That's not something that registers in a baby's mind at all. I don't know much about babies, but I do know that. I've never met a self-aware baby or child. So that's a problem with this definition, that it doesn't, or, I mean, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it fits within his view or within your view that children just aren't to that level yet of personhood. But I think, at least in our intuition, it strikes us as strange, that strikes most people as strange, that a baby or a child wouldn't be considered a person. And that's not to say that they can't become a person or that they don't have the capacity for personhood. It's just that they're not there yet. And I think that could be a really good argument against Locke. That don't you think that babies or children are persons? Or you could think of developmentally challenged people that maybe don't have the ability to recognize themselves as the same person throughout their lifetime. Those are all things to consider, especially when developing a theory of personhood. Not that you're trying to do that, I'm assuming, but if you were, something to consider. So a baby would be a counterexample to Locke's theory of personhood. Once again, I think I've said this before, but a counterexample is just an example that proves or demonstrates an argument to be unsuccessful. So, baby seems to us to fit the criteria for being a person, but in Locke's view, it does not fit the criteria for being a person. So that's a problem. All right. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention about Locke, and I think I did mention this, but another kind of problem for Locke, but he does address this, is someone who gets serious amnesia and they forget everything that happened to them previously. Like maybe they get in a car accident and they forget every single thing about their life before this moment. For him, he just says that they're not the same person, or he says that it's kind of unclear, or he says that they still have the same consciousness, so they are the same person. But either way, that creates a problem for him, because either the person in the car accident is not the same person, or they are the same person, but it's pretty unclear why. So both ways kind of create a problem for Locke. Okay, so that was about all that I wanted to say about Locke. Swinburne, his theory is actually... So, well, I guess we could just talk about who Swinburne is for a second. Sorry. So, he is alive. Richard Swinburne, he was born in 1934, is alive now. He taught at the University of Oxford in the philosophy of the Christian religion department. He has been an influential proponent of philosophical arguments for the existence of God. That's what most of his work is about. So this piece about identity is going to be influenced by his Christian background. He's Eastern Orthodox, so Eastern Orthodoxy isn't very popular in America, so I don't know that many people are super familiar with it, but I'm sure you learned about it in world history back in the day, where there was the great schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism. So anyways, he's Eastern Orthodox. Not that important, but always interesting to note. He was heavily influenced by Thomas Aquinas, and we'll kind of see that in his writing, because Thomas Aquinas was heavily influenced by Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas was known as someone that was trying to, synthesize. He was like the great synthesizer between Aristotelian works and Christianity. So Aquinas tried to merge Aristotle's teachings and the teachings of the Christian church. And in this paper by Swinburne, he talks about Aristotle and I mean, he briefly mentions his Christian background. Yeah, so we can kind of see that at work. So the main difference between this theory and Locke's theory is that Swinburne's theory is a dualist theory. So we've talked about dualism with Descartes. Dualism just means that you believe that the mind and body are separate substances. So, this is a dualist theory. So even before reading anything about this, just by looking at the title, we know that Swinburne is a dualist. He believes in the separation of the mind and body. And once again, by mind, I mean like soul, mind, all in one. Okay, so we will just kind of go through his theory and go step by step, kind of. Okay. So he starts by saying that there doesn't seem to be a contradiction in the supposition that a person might acquire a totally new body, which is what his background, Christianity, would argue, that a person will, after death, acquire a totally new body. So that's something that he's going to try to prove in some sense. The dualist theory is important for him because it shows that resurrection is possible, so that your soul can be resurrected and put into a new body and it's still the same person. That's important because if you believe in afterlife, then you need to account for how you can have a totally different body and be the same person. So he gives 2 criteria for what it means to say that his body is his own body, or for me to say that this body is my body. So we have 2 criteria for that. One is that I can move parts of this body. And 2, my knowledge of the external world is derived from its effects on this body. Okay, so first, I know that this is my body because I can move my body. I can move my arm, I can move my eyes, I can move my legs, which I'm doing right now. I can move basically anything, any part of my body that I want. I mean, not any part, but you know what I mean. So just like that, I have control of my body. That is one way that we mean when we say that your body is your own. We mean that you can move your body. And then the second thing is that my knowledge of the world around me and things going on in the world around me is derived from the world's effects on my body. So, for example, I know that this marker smells like marker because of the effect that the marker has on my body. I know that the light is bright when I look at it because of the light's effect on my eyes. So with these two things together is what we mean when we say that your body is your own. So your body is the vehicle of your agency in the world and your knowledge of the world. So that's kind of a simpler way to put these 2 points. Agency in and knowledge of the world. Yeah. All right. So then Swinburne kind of shifts gears and says that a coherent supposition is that a person might become disembodied. So a person has a body if there is one particular chunk of matter through which he has to operate on and learn about the world. But suppose he finds himself able to operate on and learn about the world within some small finite region without having to use one particular chunk of matter. He might find himself with knowledge of the position of objects in the room and able to move such objects just like that in the ways in which we know about the positions of our limbs and can move them. But the room would not be the person's body. So this is a little bit of a confusing analogy, but okay, let's try and break it down. So suppose that a person finds himself in a position where he's able to move things and learn about the world in some small little room without having to use his body. Okay, so even though, even though the room allows you to operate on and learn about the things in the world, it doesn't mean that that room is your body. It just means that simply by choosing to do so, he can gradually shift the focus of his knowledge and control, example, to the next room. So the person would be in no way limited to operating and learning through one particular chunk of matter. Hence, we may term him disembodied. So it's kind of a weird analogy, but if you follow, his whole point is that a person can become disembodied. A person can not have a body, but still be able to operate on and learn about the world. Which this is kind of reminiscent of Descartes, because Descartes thinks that you don't need your body to have knowledge of the world. You just need to be able to think. And so this is kind of a rationalist position where you can have knowledge of the world a priori without, well, I guess in this case there would be experience, but there's just not, there's not bodily experience. So it's reminiscent of rationalism, but not quite the same. Okay. So then he brings up Locke super briefly. He just says, despite Locke, many a person does forget much of what he has done. So with Locke's theory, you have the problem of people forgetting what they do. And Locke doesn't consider this to be like a super pervasive problem, or else his theory would probably account for it better. So Swinburne says that despite Locke, a lot of people forget a lot of what they do in their life. But we still suppose them to have normal bodily and brain continuity. So even if Like, I don't remember. I was trying to think the other day. I genuinely don't remember my second grade teacher's name at all. That doesn't mean that I was a different person then. It just means that I don't know why I can't remember that at all. And I like barely remember my second grade year at all. But I still suppose that I'm still the same person then. So Swinburne is arguing that most people forget a lot of what happens in their life, and we don't think that they're two different people. So he says, our grounds for supposing that a person forgets what he has done are that the evidence of bodily and brain continuity suggests that he was the previous person who did certain things, which he now cannot remember to have done. So it's vague, but bodily and brain continuity is what makes us think that the person who forgets what they did actually is the same person. So let's see. One interesting thing that he says is that he talks about natural laws and how they organize and direct and dictate how things evolve and how things occur. He makes the point that what natural laws in no way determine is which animate body is yours and which is mine. So natural laws do a lot for the growth and the development of humans, but even with natural laws, they don't state whose body is whose. So according to natural laws, if that's all we're dealing with, then there's just a bunch of different bodies. And what makes my body different from your body isn't really clear if we're only looking at the natural laws. So what makes my body mine and your body yours, he says, has to be either God or chance. So something has to allocate bodies to persons, because my personality isn't necessarily determined by natural laws, but my body is, in a sense. So according to Swinburne, you need either God or chance to allocate bodies to persons. He says that the most that natural laws determine is that bodies of a certain construction are the bodies of some person or other, who in consequence of this construction have certain apparent memories. So the only thing that natural laws do is determine that there are different bodies and that those bodies belong to some person, but it doesn't say which person. So that's why you need, for him, God, for other people, chance. Okay, now we get a little more, I think the rest is kind of easier to follow just because he's taking one account of substance and personhood and then tweaking it and making it his own. So this is where we dive into Aristotle and Aristotle's view of personhood. So for Aristotle, we're going to start with his account of the identity of substances. So according to Aristotle, a substance at one time is the same substance as a substance at an earlier time I don't know why it's so hard to keep my eyes at the right spot. Okay. At an earlier time, if and only if the later substance has the same form, if and only if the later substance has the same form as and continuity of matter with the earlier substance. Wow, sorry, that took me forever. Okay, so according to Aristotle, a substance at one time is the same substance as a substance at an earlier time, if and only if the later substance has the same form as and continuity of matter with the earlier substance. So for a substance to be the same thing at two different points, they have to have the same form and a continuity of matter. So on this view, a person is the same. So if you take substance and replace the word substance with person, then we have that a person is the same person as an earlier person if he has the same form as the earlier person and has continuity of matter. So this would mean the same form would mean that both are persons, and the continuity of matter would mean the same body. Okay. So I'm going to just erase substance and put in person. So a person at one time is the same person as a person at an earlier time, if and only if the later person has the same form as and continuity of matter with the earlier person. So this is the Aristotelian view. Keep in mind, this is not quite Swinburne's view. Okay. So he agrees, certainly, to be the same person as an earlier person. The later person has to have the same form or be the same person. But it's not the case that they have to have the same body. So he acknowledges that if his arguments are correct, then the essential characteristics of a person constitute a narrower set than those which Aristotle have included. His arguments suggest that, or Swinburne's arguments suggest that all that a person needs to be a person are certain mental capacities. And those capacities would be having conscious experiences and performing intentional actions. So he agrees that they both have to be people, but the thing that he is clarifying is that all a person needs to be a person is or are certain mental capacities. And those capacities would be having conscious experiences, and performing intentional actions. Okay. So that's what you need in order to be the same person. So he says that if his arguments are correct so far, showing that two persons can be the same even if there's no continuity in their bodily matter, we have to say that in the form stated, the Aristotelian account of identity applies only to inanimate objects in plants and has no application to personal identity. So the first thing we talked about, that Aristotle said that a substance at one time, that whole thing, that only applies to inanimate objects and doesn't apply to personal identity. So then we're faced with a choice of either saying that the criteria for personal identity are different from those for other substances, or of trying to give a more general account than Aristotle's of the identity of substances. Okay. So he talks about widening the Aristotelian account. In order to do that, then we have only to say that two substances are the same if and only if they have the same form and there is continuity of the stuff of which they are made, and allow that there may be kinds of stuff other than matter. So this would be the wider Aristotelian account. We're writing a lot today, sorry. You're going to have to for this account because it can get a little bit confusing. So the wider Aristotelian account is this. Two substances are the same if and only if they have the same form and there is continuity of the stuff of which they are made. And so this makes it different, and allow that, I'll show you in a sec, that there may be kinds of stuff other than matter. Okay, so for the wider Aristotelian account, we have that two substances are the same if and only if they have the same form and there is continuity of the stuff of which they are made, and allow that there may be kinds of stuff other than matter. Okay, so this is wider because it allows for things other than matter for the second criteria. So we may say that there is a stuff of another kind, immaterial stuff, and that persons are made of both normal bodily matter and this immaterial stuff, but that it is continuity of the latter, which provides that the continuity of stuff which is necessary for the identity of the person over time. So this immaterial stuff, if you, not to spoil it, but it's the soul. So now we're getting into what makes Swinburne's account dualistic. So you have two parts, according to Swinburne. Each person has two parts: a material part, which is the body, and an immaterial part, which is the soul. And the soul is the essential part of the person. So for Swinburne, it's not that the soul is the only thing that makes a person, but it's that it is the most important, essential thing that makes a person. And while it's logically possible for the soul to be separated from its body or from a body, almost always the soul will be accompanied by a body. It could be a new body, but a body nonetheless. So he kind of uses Descartes, because Descartes is a proponent of classical dualism, which is that there's two parts to people, material being the body and immaterial being the soul. So first we found that in Plato and then in Descartes, and fortunately enough, we just read the first two meditations of Descartes, and now we get a little snippet of the sixth meditation. So in the sixth meditation, Descartes says that he rightly concludes that his essence consists solely in the fact that he's a thinking thing. And although possibly he possesses a body with which he is very intimately conjoined. So while Descartes acknowledges that his essence is in the fact that he's a thinking thing, he also acknowledges that there is some material thing very closely conjoined to himself. That would be his body. So this is kind of similar to Swinburne, which is that you have two parts of who you are, the material and the non-material. So he says that to say that a person has an immaterial soul is just a way of expressing the point within a traditional framework of thought that a person can continue when their bodies do not. So that's the main point that he wants to make, is that a person can continue even when the body does not continue. So then at the end, he kind of shifts gears a little bit, and he just makes the point that even though he agrees with classical dualism for the most part, and that helps his argument, that the classical dualist normally argues that the soul is indivisible to its natural immortality, and that Swinburne does not agree with. He says that the more natural alternative is to say that when ordinary natural processes cannot lead to his exercising his capacities again, a person and so his soul has ceased to exist, but there remains the logical possibility that he may come into existence again. So, in classical dualism, the soul never dies. It never ceases to exist. For Swinburne, he says that your soul can cease to exist, but that God is able to bring it back to life. So, this still allows him to maintain his Christian view of the afterlife, that once people die, their soul might cease to exist, but God will raise them up again. So, it's just a clarification that he added that we probably wouldn't think is necessary, but for him it was, so always good. Okay, so that's kind of it. It's kind of a lot, but the main thing to note is that Swinburne's theory is a dualist theory, meaning that he's arguing on the basis that humans have two parts, material being body and immaterial being soul. And this is different from Locke, because Locke didn't care much about the soul. He said it might exist, it might not, but it doesn't have much to do with his theory of personal identity. Yeah, and then next week we're going to be talking about free will, and I will be posting the readings today when you're watching this. So it'll either be up already or by the end of the day it'll be up. So it'll be fun. We'll be reading Augustine and then someone else. I'm still finalizing our reading. So anyways, I hope that you all have a great week. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I did say that for the paper proposal assignment that was due a few weeks ago, some people turned it in late, and so they didn't get a grade or got a 0. And some people didn't turn it in at all, and I'm giving you the chance to turn it in if you didn't. And I'll give you up to a 50 just because it's kind of giving you a little bit of a break, just because I know it's hard to, with missing one assignment, not have the chance to get an A or a B or whatever it may be. So we'll do that this time, but yeah. So anyways, I'll talk to y'all later.